Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Rising. We have another great show planned for you. Robbie, what do we have?
All-star panelists Max Alvarez and Henry Rogers will be with us for Team Rising. And Brianna Joy Gray discusses Democrats' latest push for student loan cancellation. Plus, The Hill's Julia Manchester gives an update on Nina Turner's campaign in Ohio, including Turner's recent endorsements. But first, we wanted to discuss the House investigation of the January 6th attack. Yesterday marked the beginning of testimony, and here are some notable moments. Let's check them out.
But on January 6th, for the first time, I was more afraid to work at the Capitol than my entire deployment to Iraq. In Iraq, we expected armed violence because we were in a war zone, but nothing in my experience in the Army or as a law enforcement officer prepared me for what we confronted on January 6th.
I feel like I went to hell and back to protect them and the people in this room. But too many are now telling me that hell doesn't exist or that hell actually wasn't that bad. The indifference shown to my colleagues is disgraceful.
It was clear the terrorists perceived themselves to be Christians. I saw the Christian flag directly to my front. Another read, "Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president." Another, "Jesus is king." One flag read, "Don't give up the ship." Another had crossed rifles beneath the skull, emblazoned with the pattern of the American flag. To my perpetual confusion, I saw the thin blue line flag, a symbol of support for law enforcement, more than once, being carried by the terrorists as they ignored our commands and continued to assault us.
Yeah, that's some very powerful testimony, obviously. Dramatic, kind of points the police are raising. I think, a valid point that they're making is to point out the hypocrisy, right? Republicans are always, pounding their fists on the table, saying they're the pro-law enforcement, pro-cop party. And, then in this, when this happened, they made some members of law enforcement feel fear for their lives. They overran what the police were telling them to do, and now paradoxically it's Democrats who've been associated with wanting to defund the police. And I don't really think the mainstream Democratic Party has actually embraced that, but certainly activists, a little further outside the fringes of the Democratic Party have been relentlessly anti-cop, and yet the Capitol Police are now resistance heroes for liberals. So it's just like the tribalization. The narrative can't get in the way of the tribalization. It has to just immediately. It reminds me actually of when the consensus on Russia flipped overnight, when it turned out that Trump was kind of in his own way more dovish on Russia than Hillary Clinton, and then all the Russia hawks, like in the right, all of a sudden started downplaying Russia, and the Democratic Party became paranoid, conspiratorial about war with Russia. What did you think, Kim?
Yeah, these testimonies were just devastating to watch. They were riveting. I'm sure it was excellent television. I'm sure that, a lot of me while watching this just wondered, how much does the news media have to do with the orchestrating of all of this? This is great television, no matter which side of the aisle you're on and what your thoughts are of the entire event, whether you thought it was the worst thing to ever happen to the country and just as bad as the Civil War, or whether or not you just thought that it was, a protest that had gone awry. Either way, it was riveting television. It was heartbreaking to watch these cops, and I really, really felt for them. I understand that maybe some people were saying, well, these guys are comparing this to the Iraq War, and that seems a bit much. But, each person's trauma is individual, and I have no doubt that these cops, during that moment, when they were faced with all of those people, a mob of people coming at you, and you're one person, hindsight, we can see what happened, and things maybe turned out to where, whatever. But at the time, when you're in that moment, you don't know if that's the last day of your life. And for these officers, that is what they were feeling. So I have I feel really horrible for them. It was terrible to watch that. I don't think that one thing, the point that you're bringing up is now maybe the left will have a little bit more of an appreciation for some of the work that police officers do. There's definitely a culture We do have an over-policed, we live in an over-policed state. We definitely need to do more to hold police accountable for their actions and take some of that power to where they're not, high, so high on it. But at the same time, I do think this might bring in some more of that sympathy.
Yeah.
But otherwise, my big takeaway on this when watching it was, I just don't know if we're really learning anything new other than what we already knew. And really, this just looks like great television for CNN and MSNBC to boost the ratings.
Absolutely. We're not learning anything new. I mean, these hearings these are produced television episodes. I participated I testified before Congress before, and I watched, a member of Congress would ask a question, and then the next member would ask the same question because they need a clip of them asking it for their donor reel. So some of these things are just, it's reinforcing for your base, for your supporters. D.C. Metro Police Officer Michael Fannon denounced members of Congress who have downplayed and denied the events of January 6th. Fannon was tased, beaten, stripped of his badge, and rushed to the hospital following the attack. Let's take a listen first.
In retrospect now, thinking about those events, the things that were said, it's disgraceful that members of our government, I believe, were responsible for inciting that behavior and then continue to propagate those statements. Things like, this was 1776, or that police officers who fought risked their lives, and some who gave theirs were redcoats and traitors. To me, those individuals are, representative of the worst that America has to offer.
I use an analogy to describe what I want as a hitman. If a hitman is hired and he kills somebody, the hitman goes to jail. But not only does the hitman go to jail, but the person who hired them does. There was an attack carried out on January 6th, and a hitman sent them. I want you to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, it's definitely true that, so I understand why they say this was downplayed, because the right was in search of an explanation for what happened on January 6th that could somehow excuse former President Trump's behavior. Everything from, actually, wasn't this Antifa who did this? It was, Democratic plants, to then it was orchestrated somehow by law enforcement. And then they've kind of decided, they've landed on, well, it's not actually that bad. The sort of kernel of truth to that last explanation is, it is true. I live in D.C. I saw, crazy activists descended on this city and smashed windows and heckled people and set things on fire, and every building had to board up all summer and into the fall. And so I see what happened as in keeping with that. It was further destruction. It was by a different political faction, and it was really bad. But so was that stuff, and that stuff got downplayed by, I think, people on the liberal side who were emphasizing the historic nature of these kind of racial justice protests. So I can see why that would look hypocritical. At the same time, it's not the case that this wasn't bad. It's just that there's been a lot of bad things, and they should have all been condemned evenly. But no one wants to do that because everyone wants to excuse their own side and just condemn the other.
Yeah, I worry about the larger implications of this. I mean, I think that people have the right to protest. We know that protests often, unfortunately, do get out of hand. And I don't know if we can blame the leaders who inspired the protest for those times when they do get out of hand, unless those leaders very specifically call for that particular action of violence. And, because this will go back. I know a lot of people are probably saying, oh, Kim, this was terrible. This was an insurrection. And I understand that feeling. But the way I always try to approach a situation is swap out the characters, swap out the team, And if it still feels bad, then okay, we're onto something here. But when I look at this, I swap it out with, the Chicago 7, for example. If you've seen that movie, it's a great movie, and I think people should watch it and look at the same events where this was a political event. It was a DNC, it was the DNC convention in Chicago, and these protesters who happened to also be on the left were upset with some of the outcomes of actually, they were upset about the outcome of the election. That movie doesn't really paint that picture. They kind of talk about war, but it actually was about Humphreys getting the nomination without really running in any of the primaries. And protesters descended, and some of them got out of hand, and it went violent, and the political players that be wanted to find somebody to blame for that. And I think we need to be very, very careful the type of precedent this sets. This was bad. People were arrested. I believe, how many people were even arrested in this? 500 people were arrested. So people are being held accountable for this. We can't forget that. There is accountability for this. When people commit crimes, they are held accountable. And that is what's happening in this situation. Yeah, individual responsibility is very important. They can't blame anybody else. Nobody made you trespass and smash windows and deface public property. That's on you if you did that, and justice will eventually catch up with you as it is now. Minority House Leader Kevin McCarthy blasted the leadership at the top for what happened. Let's watch that as well.
Each of us are indebted to our brave Capitol Police officers who come every day to this House prepared to defend us. On January 6th, these brave officers were put into a vulnerable and impossible position because of the leadership at the top has failed. But unfortunately, Speaker Pelosi will only pick on people onto the committee that will ask the questions she wants asked. That becomes a failed committee and a failed report, a sham that no one can believe. If you want the true answers, do not be afraid of the questions that will get asked, and drive the evidence to wherever it comes forward.
When reporters asked Mitch McConnell if he had watched the hearing yesterday, here's what he had to say for himself.
And I stand by everything I said on January 6th and February 13th.
Why not? Peter McConnell, did you watch any of the hearing today?
No, I didn't.
Why not?
I was busy doing work. I serve in the Senate.
Committee Chair Congressman Benny Thompson says another hearing could take place in August, and they'll also be issuing subpoenas. So I think that actually the big danger that we haven't really gotten into yet is that this becomes a pretext for some massive new security regime, either at the Capitol. The Capitol Police want to open up branches in other states. They want to become an NSA type organization that is actively monitoring for threats everywhere. I always see the sort of the TSA-ification of things, right? In the Patriot Act, we were told these were going to be temporary security measures, and I just flew on a plane last week, and I still had to take off my shoes and my belt, which is pointless. Right. We all know this is security theater. It doesn't make anyone safer whatsoever. There's study after study. This is totally pointless, but this massive infrastructure exists. It damages our civil liberties. It's inefficient. It costs money. I am so worried about that kind of thing. I mean, with COVID, we're dealing with that, the pointless, restrictions that might be in place forever. And I don't want more Capitol security. I don't want more monitoring of U.S. citizens or watch lists because of this. I assume you don't either, Kim. This is the true threat of having these constant hearings where we're always talking about this, don't you think?
That is my number one fear with this everything that's going on right now, is that this is now the war on domestic terrorism. And look, we still have the Patriot Act. It is still in effect. And it's not going to go away. And when they're finished with all of this, and Democrats say, well, we need to have more security and we need to be monitoring extremism. And now we know we've got Facebook and Google and Twitter and all of these big tech companies that are in on this, saying, well, we're going to remove extremism and anything that is not with the party line, essentially, not verified or certified by the party. That worries me quite a bit, that we are going to be marching into much more of a controlled one narrative nation, and all of us under surveillance. And you're right. When you travel through Europe, by the way, they don't make you take off your shoes. And I don't think that, and they have more terrorist attacks in Europe than we do over here. So.
Right. Yeah, and they don't make school children wear masks either. They interestingly, we're the land of the free, but we have tolerated a lot of government growth, a lot of additional bureaucracy, a lot of additional pointless security measures. We can't let this be another excuse. Coming up next, we'll let all of you know what's on our radars. Stay with us.